Hey, what's up, everybody? We are on to lab number 18, 19? I don't even remember. Well, it's our first histology lab for the digestive system. And we're going to be looking at 4 organs tonight. We're going to be looking at 4 alimentary canal organs. Now, recall the alimentary canal is the food tube. So, from mouth until the anus. So, it includes the oral cavity, the pharynx, the esophagus, the stomach, the small intestine, and the large intestine. We're going to be looking at the esophagus, the stomach, small, and large intestine. Now, in lecture, we learned that the lining of all these organs has the same structural plan. There are 4 basic layers in the wall of each of these organs, okay? So we're going to zoom in on each organ. We're going to look at the model here. We're going to zoom in on the model for each of these organs. Like this part is the esophagus, this part is the stomach, this is the small intestine, this is the large intestine. Then we'll look at the actual histology. Sound good? All right. So, this is the wall of the esophagus. We got the 4 basic layers. Okay, so this whole purple guy right here, that is our mucosa. So the mucosa always lines the lumen. The mucosa always has 3 layers to it, like 3 sublayers. So there's always a epithelium, which in this case is a stratified squamous for protection. Then there's a lamina propria, which lamina means layer, propria means like belonging to, and this is a connective tissue layer. And then there's a layer called the muscularis mucosae. That's like the muscle of the mucosa, and it is gonna kind of wiggle and jiggle the mucosa. Okay, so those are my 3 parts to my mucosa. And this is my esophagus. I'm gonna know it's the esophagus because of this stratified squamous epithelium. That is such a good clue. Now, if we go deep, or not deep, rather outside of the mucosa, our mucosa is right here. If we go right here in this gray where my green arrow is, that's the submucosa. That's where I'm going to have a lot of connective tissue for structural support. Plus, I'm going to have like blood vessels, nerves, lymphatic stuff as well. And in the case of the esophagus, I see this submucosal mucus gland, and it's going to make mucus. It has a duct that goes this way. I see openings for other glands as well, and here's another gland also. Obviously, mucus gland makes mucus. The point of the mucus is to lubricate the passageway to make it easier to swallow food. Now, I also see my muscularis externa outside of my submucosa. It is going to have 2 layers in my esophagus. There is an inner circular layer, then an outer longitudinal layer. The purpose of this muscularis externa, in a word, is peristalsis. It's how we move food through the tube. Now, last but not least, out here where my blue arrow is, that's my adventitia. We've seen an adventitia on the trachea, on arteries and veins. Recall that adventitias are going to anchor. All right, here's an unlabeled one for you to play with yourself. Now here is the real thing. Always looks exactly like the model. Well, you can figure stuff out though. Like here's my lumen, so I know this is my epithelium. Notice how the esophagus has like this collapsed lumen. That's pretty characteristic too. Epithelium is stratified squamous. Under the epithelium, we're going to have our lamina propria. Then there's a little pinkish layer. You see this little pinkish layer right here? That is my muscularis mucosae. Then this kind of lighter colored region, my blue star is in there too. That is my submucosa. Then I got my circular muscularis externa. Then I got my longitudinal muscularis externa. And oftentimes we don't see the adventitia. It's just not here. All right, cool. Here's me zooming in on the stratified squamous epithelium. Learn to recognize stratified squamous epithelium because you're only going to see that in the esophagus for this particular upcoming exam. Here's another one. Nice stratified squamous epithelium, lamina propria. Really helpful when they have those abbreviations there. And there's the muscularis mucosae. And with that, we got one down, 3 to go. Now, we're looking at the wall of the stomach. Again, notice the common plan. I have a mucosa, so the black arrow on your right, the mucosa. And in my mucosa, there's a simple columnar epithelium going up and going down. Then I got a gray lamina propria, and then there's my muscularis mucosae. Now we do have some holes here. These holes are gastric pits. The gastric pits also like the beginning right here, but if we go down the gastric pit, like we get deeper in here, we are in a gastric gland. Gastric glands make gastric juice, which is that digestive fluid. It's got hydrochloric acid. It's got that protease pepsin that we talked about in lecture. That's coming from the gastric glands. And they make hormones like gastrin and ghrelin as well. All right, we see our submucosa. Nothing special about it. We see our muscularis externa as well. Now we learned in lecture the muscularis externa has 3 layers. It has a outer longitudinal, a middle circular, and an inner oblique. We don't see the inner oblique layer in this model of the stomach, unfortunately. Then out here is our serosa. In terms of the histology for today, only the esophagus is going to have an adventitia. All right, here's the unlabeled one for you to label on your own. And here is the real deal. So here's our lumen. So this purple area is my mucosa. That's my mucosa. I can see my epithelium. I can see my lamina propria. I can see my muscularis mucosae. Then I got my submucosa. Then I got my muscularis externa. Now what I want to do is zoom in on the mucosa. And when I do that, I've got my mucosa with the black arrow. I see this simple columnar epithelium at the surface. And this would be a gastric pit right here. Blue arrow is on a gastric pit. If we go deeper within a gastric pit, we get to a gastric gland. Now they branch a lot, which is why it looks so messy down here. Kind of hard to tell where the lamina propria is in this, so we can kind of leave that to be for right now. But I do see this gorgeous muscularis mucosae right there. And then outside of it, I can't get my words right tonight. Outside of it, I got my submucosa. I see a little artery in there, another blood vessel over here. Cool. So now we're zooming in on just the mucosa of the stomach again. There's that gastric pit. Any space deep down here would be a gastric gland. There's that simple columnar epithelium. This is kind of an ugly picture, but I got it on my slideshow, so why not? Here's my mucosa of my stomach, my submucosa, and my muscularis externa. Now this one, I like this one because this one shows me something. All right, here's the here's the mucosa. There's the muscularis mucosae. Here's our submucosa. Now, the dark lines in the submucosa are elastic fibers because think about it. The stomach stores food. It needs to be able to stretch and then recoil. Now, outside of that, red arrow here, that's my entire muscularis externa. Now, I really like this picture because I can see all 3, 1, 2, 3 sublayers. Got my outer longitudinal layer, my middle circular layer, and my inner oblique layer. Cool. So we got 2 organs down. We got 2 to go. So again, we're back to the model. This is the small intestine. Again, basic layered structure. Mucosa with its trio of sublayers, submucosa, muscularis externa with its duet of sublayers, then our serosa. Now all of these sticky out things here are villi. Villi are going to give us more surface area. Villi give us more surface area. There's the word right there. So this is one villus sticking out here, simple columnar epithelium. The little space down here is called an intestinal crypt. Crypt. I said gripped. I meant crypt. Intestinal crypt. It makes intestinal juice, which is rich in mucus and digestive enzymes. There's my lamina propria, which is my mucosal connective tissue. There's my muscularis mucosae, which wiggles and jiggles my villi. Here's my submucosa with blood vessels. Here's my muscularis externa with the standard inner circular, outer longitudinal layers. Then there's my serosa. Sweet. Blank one for you to play with. Here is the real thing. Look at these villi. Can't see that anywhere else. Nobody else is going to have villi. Some of them have been like cut off. Some of them are pretty like connected. So these are villi. And so this is my mucosa here. It's hard to like see the epithelium. There is a simple columnar epithelium in here. It has goblet cells, by the way, which are for mucus production. I can see spaces in the lower part of my mucosa here, and those spaces would be my intestinal crypts. Now, this gets kind of weird here. This is my submucosa, but this collection of purple things is called a Peyer's patch. And a Peyer's patch is just a bunch of lymphatic nodules. Now I'm seeing this because this is the ileum, so it's the end of the small intestine. And we have these lymphatic nodules in the ileum, and a collection of them is called a Peyer's patch. And a lymphatic nodule itself is a collection of lymphocytes. Now, think about it. This is the ileum, the end of the small intestine. Well, what's next? The large intestine, which is rich in bacteria. So we need protection from those bacteria. And these guys, these lymphatic nodules, whole thing is a Peyer's patch, are made of lymphocytes. That's why it's so purple. Think back to the lymphocytes in the second lab we did. All right, I got my muscularis externa here. I'll look at the layers of it in a second and actually see a smattering of my serosa right there. Cool, cool. Now I'm zooming in on my small intestine a little better. I still have these villi. Look at these awesome villi. These are beautiful. My villi have a simple columnar epithelium with just multitude of goblet cells. All the little white circles, those are goblet cells. Intestinal crypt, a little space down there for intestinal juice. Here's my submucosa, and I see a couple lymphatic nodules, which are clusters of lymphocytes, and a group of lymphatic nodules is known as a Peyer's patch. I also get a little bit of my intercircular muscularis externa up there. If I zoom in on some other villi, beautiful villi right here. Look at that. Simple columnar epithelium, little oval sort of clear cells are my goblet cells. Got a little lamina propria in here. Got my muscularis mucosae here, and if I find it, I can also find nearby my intestinal crypts. Then I got my submucosa down here. Cool. Now I'm looking at the muscularis externa of my ileum, and I can beautifully see my two sublayers, inner circular, outer longitudinal. One final one. Pause the slide and see if you can find everything I've listed here. Pause the slide. Pause the video. You know what I meant. See if you can find all this stuff. All right, lastly, we have the large intestine. Last one, the colon. Same basic pattern here, right? Man, we're going through this fast. Same basic pattern. Mucosa with its trio of sublayers. Simple columnar epithelium here, lamina propria, muscularis mucosae. Then there's my submucosa. Then there is my muscularis externa. 2 layers, inner circular, outer longitudinal. Then there's my serosa. Now there are no villi. There are holes here, and these holes are for intestinal glands. They're making mucus primarily. All right, that's pretty much it. There's one for you to label yourself. Here's the real deal. Notice no villi. No villi. There's my mucosa, submucosa with a big vein in it, inner circular muscularis externa, outer longitudinal, then the serosa. So I can see the 4 layers beautifully here. If I zoom in a little bit, not really zoom in actually, just get a different view. Here's my mucosa. Look at all those goblet cells, all those clear guys in there. Look at all those goblet cells. Intestinal glands as well. So one of the big jobs for the large intestine is to absorb water from poop. And the more water we absorb from poop, the harder it is for the poop to move. So we mitigate that by having a lot of mucus secretion. And that mucus comes from the intestinal glands here, as well as the goblet cells. You can also see my nice submucosa and my 2 layers of my muscularis externa, inner circular, outer longitudinal. Fantastic. Here we got just another close-up view. Mucosa, nicely right there. Hard to see the sublayers really. There's my submucosa, inner circular muscularis externa, nice intestinal gland, and a bunch of goblet cells. And I got one more for you to pause and label. No, this is not a pause and label one. This is just a couple final things. Zooming in on my muscularis externa of my colon here, large intestine, inner circular, outer longitudinal, and we get a bit of serosa as well. And that, folks, fastest lab ever. Wow. 17 minutes. Watch it twice. Watch it 3 times. Actually, if you think about it, lab is normally, an hour, 15 minutes. So you should watch this guy, at least 4 times, because that would be 68 minutes or 72 minutes. That sounds perfect. All right, I'll see you guys next time. Hopefully I'll see you in class. Reach out if you have questions, problems, suggestions, comments, jokes, all of the above. Bye.